Hi, everybody. I'm Tessa with Fertility Specialists of Texas, and thank you for joining Facebook Live Friday. We are so super excited to have Laura Orr with us today. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist, correct? And before we get started, she is bringing a little interactive situation to the conversation today, and I'll let her kind of explain that, and then we'll kind of get and dive into the topic at hand.
All right, hi there. So I brought my laptop here, so might be a little, I'm going to do my best so that you can see it. But what I thought we could do as we continue the Facebook Live is have a little bit of interaction from the people watching. And so I thought would be fun to do is have a little word cloud created by you. And so by doing that, all you have to do is text Laura or 949 to the number 37607. And I believe
It's in the,
yeah,
in the
Tessa typed it in
description.
there.
Yeah.
Okay. And then once that happens, you're able to type in any words or feelings that come up for you when you think of infertility. You can do it as many times as you want, but you would want to do it one word at a time. So, for example, we're going to try it out right now just so that you can get a good idea. And Tessa's going to text in a word, but right now it's kind of blank. And so Tessa texted it in right now, the
So
word
there's longing.
longing. And so as more of you join in, we'll start to see more words appear on the word cloud. And the more often a word is used, the bigger the word will get. And we'll just kind of check in with that as we speak to see what is coming up for you as you watch our conversation today.
So I just want to pulling it up on my phone too. Sorry, guys. Thank you again for kind of joining us today. And I know that the emotional impact is such a huge component to the fertility struggle. And I think it's one that's often overlooked because we're so focused on what is my body not able to do or my partner's body. And so we kind of put the emotional impact on the back burner. And I think that part, oftentimes people kind of are more, they don't want to talk about that part for whatever. I mean, there's so much shadowing and secrecy associated with infertility, but especially the emotional impact. And so I kind of wanted to just give you a platform and kind of tell everybody about why this is such a personal issue for you, and then kind of talk about how you help people.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you kind of made a really important point when you talked about the fact that it's not being talked about very much. And I think one thing that I've noticed is that it's kind of reinforced by society, loved ones, and friends that this isn't really something that we talk about. And so that message is kind of made clear to people who are struggling with infertility. And as a result, women often feel, and men, couples who are struggling with infertility often feel a sense of loneliness and this feeling of like, I don't know really where to go or who to talk to. And so coming into this, I just wanted to kind of be transparent about where I'm coming from and where my specialty originated. And that is from my own experience with infertility, which has been something that we've been challenged with for about 3 years now. I have secondary infertility, which from my understanding that about 30% of people struggling with infertility have secondary infertility, and that's my story as well. So we had a daughter. The pregnancy, labor, and delivery was all normal. Conception was easy. And then once we decided that we wanted to have another baby, we pretty much wanted to jump in pretty quickly because we wanted our daughter to have a sibling close in age with her, all the dreams that you have, when you decide that you want to have a baby. And then years and years later, it still wasn't happening for us. So we sought fertility treatments, received fertility treatments. They have been unsuccessful thus far. And so right now we're taking a break. But that's not the end of our journey, as many women could probably attest to. And so that's really where this all kind of started for me. as a therapist already practicing for 7 years, it was really impossible for me to not consider the mental health implications involved in seeking fertility treatment and going through this journey. And so that really happened for me day one, probably the moment I had that question, like, about something must be off or wrong. This is very different from our first experience.
Right.
And so then right away, I think my brain kind of, I don't know if it was coping by dealing with the mental health implications, but it just went there. And so ever since then, my heart has really been in that field of helping women who are struggling with infertility. And so that's kind of where my background comes from. And so that's been happening for about 3 years now.
How frequently do you see patients coming in as a result of infertility?
Not as frequently as I would expect, because 1 in 8 women, as you know, struggle with infertility. I would hope that more women would feel the need for that kind of treatment. Mm-hmm. And I think that's why these lives are so important, to include mental health in that fertility treatment process, because it is such a huge part of the process. Mm-hmm. And something that I think is only going to increase women being able to seek treatment individually and through group therapy and even couples counseling is by this advocacy that your organization is, or that your clinic is doing right now. But yeah, so not as much, but I feel like it's growing as more people are talking about it, as Resolve is becoming more involved in advocacy. Right. And encouraging, more involvement in National Fertility Awareness Week, which is coming up
next month.
And the Walk for Hope is coming up in May. And so I think with that, the stigma is going to kind of be reduced.
Right.
Because I think what happens is, like we had said earlier, the culture of secrecy that is involved in infertility causes women to feel a lot of shame. And it causes women to feel like they need to ignore their pain. And so ignoring your pain would involve not seeking mental health treatment, right? And I'm not saying women don't do it. There are a lot of amazing support groups out there, and there are a lot of women or a lot of therapists who treat this. But however, I feel like we could do as a community of mental health practitioners and people in the field of fertility to push this level of mental health care, or push the importance of mental health care, kind of going hand in hand with fertility treatments, right?
Right. I think that's just such a huge component, and just the stress level alone. At our fertility seminars, the doctors always say, it's not just about stress, but stress certainly isn't helping the process. So even if you're not struggling with anything else, but just having someone to talk to help you deal with the stress of going through treatment or working up towards starting treatment, because that we kind of acknowledge that making the leap from trying to conceive at home and then making the leap to actually acknowledging that you need to see a specialist, it's a huge step. It's a leap of faith, and it's acknowledging that this is not going to work for me on my own, and I need to see someone. And for me especially, that was just a huge thing that I had to kind of come to terms with, because immediately you start thinking of, I'm broken, and why me, and everyone else is having babies at the drop of a hat, and what about the financial implications? And you stress about stressing, and then you stress about stressing about stress. It's just a snowball of that.
And that brings about shame, right? Like, I shouldn't be feeling these feelings,
right,
but here they are, right? And for some people, it's a very new feeling. Life has been pretty easy, quote unquote easy up until this point.
Right.
And now it's time for baby. And then that story isn't completing itself for them. Right. And so, that decision to have medical intervention in the fertility process, I think, is stressful for probably 100% of people who enter this office.
Yeah.
Anyone who comes, I would love to meet the people who come in here who are not stressed.
Right. Exactly.
And so, as you say, if everyone in here, if all the patients if we could even assume that 80% of the patients, I'll be generous, right?
Yeah.
80% of the patients are experiencing stress. Wouldn't it be great for them to have that resource,
Right.
whether that be individual counseling, group therapy, because like you said, money is a factor, right? It's not cheap.
Right.
And so knowing the full range of treatment and knowing that you can have support regardless of your circumstance, whether that just be an online community, access to self-help books, right? Or even just participating in a walk, which I believe is cheap or free. I don't remember right now, but just again, anything, there is treatment and help out there.
Right.
And so making that known to the public, I think it's great that you guys are participating in that, because you really are informing the public and people who come here about the importance of taking care of yourself.
Right.
Because so much of the focus is on your reproductive organs and what, pushing them to do what they need to do in order to have a baby. But, and so a lot of the other, parts of you are put on the back burner, but they're still there. Right. And the burner is on. Right. So they're heating up.
Yeah. I think, we were talking earlier before we started about kind of, we like to communicate that a lot of people at Fertility Specialists of Texas have kind of gone through this journey. And we like to share that with other people, just to let you know that when you come here, it's not just people coming in to get a paycheck. Like, we truly, truly care about what we do here and why. And we were chatting a little bit about my own journey. And I really wish that I had sought individual counseling. Like, my husband and I ended up having to have some marriage counseling. And I say had to have, it wasn't, we waited until we were nearly broken. It wasn't just my body. Like, we just kept pushing, and we weren't really pushing together. We were letting ourselves be pushed apart. And if you don't have that support of your partner, if you're doing this, inside of a couple, it can really become like this little crack. And then before you know it, you've got like the Grand Canyon in the middle of your bed, and that's not going to help the situation. And some days I really am surprised that we made it out together. And we did seek marriage counseling a little bit later than we should have, but I think that's huge. It's not just a personal thing. It's everybody, and it trickles out. It trickles out into your loved ones and your friends and to everybody. So, what advice do you have for anyone who's watching or will watch this later about recognizing the signs and when they need to kind of realize, what, I need someone besides myself.
Something more, right? And I think, your story is a normal one. I think most people wait to get help until they're in crisis, and things are just completely overwhelming, because we constantly tell ourselves, like, I can do this, or my feelings aren't important, or I have other things on my plate and I don't have time for myself. And so I would just encourage people to really challenge that, and throughout this, challenge themselves in that, right? And tell them, and realize that your emotional health is just as important as your physical health. And if anything, there's research out there that supports that your emotional well-being will result in improved medical outcomes for you. And so if you're wanting to optimize your health just in general, you have to pay attention to your mental health as well. And so if you're going through this process, I think at the beginning, it is important to have a conversation with yourself about how you're feeling in that moment. And if there's any feelings of loneliness, doubt, shame, or fear, I think that would be the moment immediately to seek help. And as far as what you had said about the strain it can have on couples, we had spoken about it a little bit earlier, you and I, that men and women definitely experience this differently, right? And so I would say for couples, support immediately right away. Preliminary support would be extremely helpful, because I think people go into it with these certain expectations, and those expectations aren't met because men and women, they grieve differently, they process stress differently, and
Right.
and so their needs look very different. And women, through receiving this reproductive assistance, are a lot more is being asked of their bodies than is being asked of men.
Right.
And so you hear men say a lot of and if you'll hear a lot from men that they feel hopeless and angry, and that if they could take the burden, some of the medical burden off their wife's plate, they totally would, but they don't know how. And that is such a man thing to say,
right?
Because men are so instrumental, whereas women just tend to, I'm being very general here, but they tend to be more instrumental. Problems are solved through doing. There's a great book called You Just Don't Understand, where it's all about that, and about how men and women process their stress, right? And so women tend to want empathy, and for someone to just sit and talk with them like we're doing right now, right? And that's not really how men do it, but that doesn't mean that they can't do it. It just means that the conversation needs to happen, and therapy is a really great place to do that. So I would definitely recommend as soon as possible. Really, you don't have to be completely broken to ask for help.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing to recognize. Is so many people are like, well, it's not that bad. I already have other appointments. I already have, like you said, all of these other things going on. Do I really need to address this?
Absolutely. And I want to also add, knowing the prevalence of depression and anxiety in our country is something to comment on as well, and something to notice, because a lot of people receiving fertility treatments might have a background of depression and anxiety, right? And so this could be something that triggers a depressive episode, or it could create even more anxiety for a person who is struggling with those symptoms or with those syndromes. And so if that is you, and you know that about yourself, then preliminary work would definitely be important.
Yeah. Is there anything that like an individual or a couple could do on their own, like in addition to seeking the resources that you've kind of mentioned? Anything from maybe your own personal experience that's kind of helped you push past through like just a moment, or I'm having a really bad week, or it's such a Monday. Anything that they can kind of do to help address or alleviate, or even put a Band-Aid on, just to get through something, those moments of anxiety and stress and sadness.
Sure. One thing that I often stress is honoring your feelings by sitting in it, and also not living in it. Right. And that's so allowing yourself to feel the feelings, and also knowing what coping skills or resources that you have to not live in those feelings. It's okay to be angry, right? It's okay to have a trigger. And there's, I think each person who comes in here to receive treatment is going to have their own set of triggers. And a lot of times you don't know what they are until it's staring you in the face.
100%.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And so how can you prepare for that if, when it's just happening to you in the moment? And so, really recognizing that that's what this is, and allowing that feeling to happen for you. And then taking care of yourself so that you're feeling angry, but you're not angry.
Right.
You're not living an angry life. Right. And so again, individual care or mental health care is going to be important. I think the power of groups are huge, because you are not alone in your story. And there are women who are wanting to share their story so badly that a community of women being able to do that together, I think, does much more for a person's feelings of anger, loneliness, and being triggered, and grief, all of those feelings, all those hard feelings. If they can just have someone sit with them and say, I totally get it, because I've been there too, and I've had that trigger. And so I know I'm kind of jumping around.
No.
There's just so much to say, right?
Yeah.
We could go on for days, right? But I definitely think that community involvement is important. But yeah, in those moments, being able to honor the anger, honor whatever the feeling is, the sadness, and then caring for yourself in a way that allows you to move forward. And that is different for every single person out
Right.
there, right? I'm sure people could write in or take their own mental inventory of the things that can help them through that.
Yeah.
But on a personal level, and I've encouraged this with others, I do keep a journal, right? To just really write that anger down.
Yeah.
And just a lot of self-talk, and also knowing that just like grief, I have a background in grief. And so I see a lot of parallels with this. And a lot of times the question of grief, I hear a lot with infertility is just like, when is the feeling, the pain going to end?
Right.
Right. When am I going to care less about what's happening to me?
Right.
Right. And so I feel like honoring that and knowing that it's going to, your grief will evolve and change. But it's not forever. At the end of the day, your story is not going to be all about this. It can feel that way right now. Right. But the big picture, it will be different at the end of your journey.
Yeah.
And so if you can tell yourself that without disqualifying or invalidating the hard feelings, I think that can be very beneficial.
Yeah. I loved what you said about allowing yourself to kind of own the emotion and let yourself feel it rather than immediately saying, you know what, I shouldn't be feeling like this, so I'm not going to allow myself to have these feelings. But then also not just letting it
all
weekend, right.
Yeah.
The weekend sounds really good.
Netflix is great.
Right. Netflix and chill and get over my emotions.
Why not? Right. But I mean, you're right. Yeah. But, and we certainly have those moments, honor those moments. I think it goes with, how is it impacting your functioning throughout your day? Right. If you take a day off because you had a really difficult, moment with your fertility and whatever that trigger may be. Yes. I mean, honor that, take the day off and do what you need to do to take care of yourself.
Right.
When you notice that that's happening very, very frequently and it's hurting aspects of your life, then that might be the time where you need to have, some more support for sure.
Right.
For sure. Right.
Right.
And so again, sitting in it and not living in it. And so whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, to deal with those hard feelings, whether that's taking a walk, going to kickboxing, going to see a movie, whatever that is for you, take the time to do it because you deserve it. This is really, really hard what you're going through. So
I think for me, I've noticed, and I've kind of shared a little bit of my story as we do these chats, and every time I do, it's a little cathartic for me. Not a little bit; it's very cathartic for me.
I'm so glad.
It's like I needed projects because sometimes I would kind of get stuck in a cycle of emotion. I'm like, okay, I've got to stop, or I'm going to drive myself crazy. So I would find suddenly I needed to really nest, or I was like, which new hairstyle can I do? Or, I needed a project, an outlet for all of these emotions and frustrations. I needed to put it into action and just kind of get it out of me and put it into the world, put that energy to good use. Yeah. And so that was always a really good one for me. I don't know how many times my husband would come home and he'd be like, oh, you moved the furniture again. Awesome. Or,
But that's good to know about yourself. Yeah. So that's, if you tie that back to grief, that's called instrumental grieving.
Oh, so there's a word for it.
There is. There's internalized grief and instrumental grieving. And so, as you can tell, I said journaling. So I bet you can wonder what kind of griever I might be. So I'm internalized, right? So very much go within myself. So a good, music is good for me just to kind of sit and process. Yoga, kind of really going into me, right? Is in my internalized grief. I don't know if I'm explaining it very well. No. But then there's the instrumental griever who does things to help herself through that process.
Yeah.
And so that sounds like what you are. And that's so good to know that about yourself, because when you're having those down moments and you're really wanting to honor those feelings that you're having, a way to sit in it and not live in it is to do these things, like rearranging your house, right? Or coming up with these projects, because that is part of the healing process,
right?
Truly.
And then just
and beautiful things can come from that.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think one of the other points that you touched on that for me, we're almost at 30 minutes.
Oh my gosh. Did anyone?
No,
probably not. We kind of jumped through that at them. The word cloud. We'll have to try that some other time.
Yes. I think it's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun.
Is kind of identifying your triggers. And so Laura and I were talking before we got started a little bit about just, her personal journey and mine. And I'd mentioned, my son is 11, he'll be 12 in May. So our journey has long just been, you kind of think, like you had said, it's just a part of you, but then just a part of your life. It's just a season. It's a chapter. It's not your whole life. But then my husband kind of out of the blue the other day, he was like, I want to have a baby and I would love to have a daughter. And I was like, whoa. It just kind of threw me for a loop. Yeah. And, we were talking about how men and women kind of process the journey differently. And a lot of times, and I don't feel like I'm being disrespectful to our process in saying this because he's kind of admitted, but, it was very different for him. It was because I was the one who had all the issues and I had debilitating pain, so that did not help. And he was right there with me, but it wasn't the same for him. And I don't think it wasn't all consuming for him. And so now that we're at this stage in our life, and it was just this trigger that I never expected. And I got weepy with Laura a few minutes before we started. And I was like, oh, I don't want to cry. And it was just kind of one of those moments, like if you don't feel like your family is fully complete, it can kind of pop up at any moment. Like, hey, 12 years later, I think baby. And I'm like, oh. And then I see him kind of interacting with the babies and our nieces and nephew. And it kind of, it hurts a little bit. I mean, I love that we are so blessed with a beautiful family and he can love on our nieces and nephew and kind of fill that void. But I also know what that void feels like. And now I almost feel like the roles are reversed. Like I want to take that from him and make it, because I know what that's like. I know what that pain is like. And I wish that he didn't have that. Yeah. So we're kind of, I don't know.
So now you've swapped.
Yeah, a little bit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, now that the roles are switched, maybe you have a better idea of what was going on for him and maybe he has a better idea going on for you.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
You can, I'm wondering if asking yourself what he needs based on what you knew, what you needed.
Right. Yeah.
Wow. That's, I'm tempted to,
dive
to think about
that.
Yeah. Deep dive, peel back that. Yeah. Talk about that.
Layers.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think, that support that couples need from each other is also so important. And again, it's hard to even know. And we talked about that earlier. It's hard to know. And I think a lot of the emphasis is on the woman, understandably so. But then many times she has this spouse who's going through the process with her.
Right.
And he has no clue, right? Or this person has no clue how to be supportive. And as little as we may think we have resources for infertility treatment, for mental health, right? Treatment for women going through infertility, it's even less for men, right? You can go through a bookstore or Amazon, I guess, and see these books that are mostly geared towards women.
Yeah.
How to cope. And a lot of it isn't really helpful for men.
Right.
There's a book that I like to recommend called Not Pregnant, because in the back it's written by a woman who has her own, has her own story about her struggle with fertility. And what I love about it is one, her reproductive endocrinologist helped write it. And so there's little blurbs about the medical piece, which is really interesting.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes. And then in the appendix, there's a place where her husband writes about it.
Oh, wow.
And what he was experiencing and gives advice. And then another part of the appendix is just men in it kind of an interview fashion, talking about what it was like for them and the feelings that they had. And so it's in the appendix though, right? Yeah. I mean, and I'm like grabbing onto it and being like, we need this, men need this to see this. But men do need support. part, right? Because they are feeling it. I think, it's just so different, and it's quieter, even quieter than what we as women have to, feel, what it feels like for us, right? Going through what we're going through. It's even more so for them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Someone should hop on that topic. Maybe you should start working on the book.
Yeah. How to help men. Write a book for it.
Well, we're at 30 minutes now, and we're going to go ahead and sign off for the day. But I will post a link in the comments to your website so people can get in touch with you. And then, if you don't mind, we'll have you comment and include the links or the titles of the books that you recommended, just so people can find them easily. But I want to thank you again for coming, and I wish you all the best on your journey.
Thank you so much.
Sending you all the sticky vibes and baby dust when y'all get started again.
I appreciate that.
And thank you guys so much for joining, and we'll talk to you soon.